Two Bears was falling from the cliff. What this group of children did will shock you. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the mountainside as Miss Harper's 5th grade class trudged along the narrow trail. 12 children moved in a scattered line, their excited chatter mixing with the distant sound of rushing water far below. The Whispering Pines. Annual nature excursion had been circled on their classroom calendar for months, and finally, the day had arrived. "Stay on the path, everyone," called Miss Harper, adjusting her wide-brimmed hat against the strengthening sunlight. "We'll reach the observation point in about 20 minutes. 10-year-old Noah Parker hung back from the others, his camera dangling from his neck. Unlike his classmates who raced ahead, pointing at colorful birds and unusual plants, Noah preferred to take his time. He wanted to remember everything about this day. The crisp mountain air filled his lungs as he breathed deeply, savoring the scent of pine and wild herbs. The trail curved dangerously close to the edge of the cliff, where a 300-foot drop ended at the churning Silver Creek below. "Noah, don't get too close to the edge," warned Miss Harper, noticing his fascination with the view. "That part of the mountain can be unstable." "Yes, Miss Harper," Noah replied, stepping back reluctantly. He raised his camera to capture the dramatic landscape when something moved in his viewfinder. Noah lowered the camera and squinted. "Miss Harper," he called, his voice suddenly tight. "I think there's something over there." Miss Harper joined him, shading her eyes. "Where, Noah?" "On that rock ledge," Noah pointed to a rocky outcropping about 50 yards away, separated from their trail by a small ravine. "I think it's bears." The word bears traveled like electricity through the group. The children who had been ahead quickly scrambled back, faces a mixture of fear and excitement. "Everyone stay calm," Miss Harper said firmly, though her own voice wavered slightly. "Where exactly, Noah?" By now, all 12 children had gathered, heads craning to see. There, indeed, were 2 bears, one large and one significantly smaller, pacing nervously on a narrow ledge that jutted out from the mountainside. The rock beneath their paws appeared to be crumbling, sending small cascades of pebbles into the abyss below. "That's a mother and her cub," whispered Zoe Chen, the tallest girl in their class and an avid reader of wildlife magazines. "They shouldn't be this far from the forest. Something must have scared them." "The little one looks terrified," said Liam Rodriguez, his dark eyes wide with concern. Liam rarely spoke up in class, but animals always captured his attention. The children watched in horrified fascination as the ledge beneath the bears continued to deteriorate. A loud crack echoed across the ravine, making everyone jump. More rocks tumbled away, leaving the bears with even less secure footing. "Miss Harper, we have to do something," pleaded Mia Washington, the class president who took her leadership role seriously, even outside school. "They're going to fall." Miss Harper pulled out her phone. "I'll call the park rangers," she said, tapping the screen anxiously. After a moment, her face fell. "No service up here. Daisy, run back down the trail to where we had reception earlier. Tell them we need help immediately with trapped bears on the east cliff face of Silver Trail." Daisy Turner, the fastest runner in their class, nodded and took off down the path they had just climbed. "The rest of you, stay back from the edge," instructed Miss Harper. "It's too dangerous to—" Another loud crack interrupted her words. The children gasped as a sizable chunk of the ledge gave way beneath the mother bear's back paws. She let out a distressed growl, scrambling to maintain her balance while trying to keep her cub away from the edge. "They won't make it until help arrives," said Owen Wilson, his freckled face pale with worry. "Look how fast the ledge is breaking." The mother bear was now pressed against the mountainside, her large body partially shielding her cub from the drop. But the remaining ledge was barely wide enough for them both, and more pieces continued to break away with each movement. "We have to help them ourselves," Mia declared, dropping her backpack to the ground. "Miss Harper, isn't there anything we can do?" Miss Harper looked torn between keeping her students safe and acknowledging the dire situation unfolding before them. "Children, it's extremely dangerous to attempt any kind of rescue. These are wild animals, and that cliff is unstable." "But they'll die if we do nothing," Noah said quietly, his camera forgotten. "The baby bear is so scared." The children looked at each other, an unspoken connection forming between them. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out, the sound echoing across the canyon as if emphasizing the urgency of the moment. The mother bear gave a low, desperate moan that seemed to touch something deep inside each of them. "I have an idea," Zoe said suddenly, her eyes bright with determination. "If we work together, maybe we can create a safe path for them." As the children huddled together, sharing ideas and gathering courage, no one noticed the dark clouds beginning to gather on the horizon, promising to add yet another challenge to their daring rescue attempt. The mountain wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of approaching rain and the weight of the decision that now rested on their young shoulders. "What if we made a bridge?" suggested Owen, his mind already calculating distances and materials. The son of an engineer, Owen often saw solutions where others saw only problems. "If we could lay something across that small gap, maybe the bears could cross to our side." "With what?" Liam asked, gesturing around them. "We don't have anything long enough." Mia opened her backpack, dumping its contents onto the ground. "Everyone, empty your bags. Let's see what we have to work with." The children quickly formed a pile of supplies: lunch boxes, water bottles, notebooks, several jackets, a first aid kit, and various other school trip essentials. Nothing seemed immediately useful for creating a bridge across a 20-foot ravine. "What about our jackets?" suggested Zoe. "My mom showed me how to tie knots when we went sailing last summer. If we tie them together, maybe—" "That won't be strong enough for bears," Noah interrupted, his eyes still fixed on the increasingly distressed animals. "The mother is too heavy. The jackets would tear." The cub let out a frightened whimper that echoed across the ravine, making several children wince. The mother bear was now using her body to pin her cub against the mountain face, protecting it from the edge, but her own footing was precarious at best. "Wait," said a quiet voice from the back of the group. All heads turned to Ruby Santos, the newest student in their class. Ruby had transferred to Whispering Pines Elementary just 3 weeks ago and rarely spoke above a whisper. "What if we don't bring them to us? What if we help them go the other way?" She pointed past the bears to where the ledge connected to a wider part of the mountain, a safe route that led down into the forested valley. They're stuck in the middle. If they could just get past that broken section, they could escape that way. Miss Harper followed Ruby's gesture. That might work. But how would we help them move in that direction? We can't exactly tell them where to go. "Maybe we can," Liam said thoughtfully. "Bears have an amazing sense of smell. My uncle works at a wildlife sanctuary. He says they can smell food from miles away." A spark of realization lit up Mia's face. "Our lunches. We could create a trail of food to lead them toward safety." The children excitedly pulled out sandwiches, apples, granola bars, and other snacks from their lunch containers. Miss Harper looked troubled. I don't know if this is wise, she said. Feeding wild animals can be dangerous, and we're teaching them to associate humans with food. It's just this once, Zoe argued. It's an emergency, Miss Harper. They'll die if we don't help them. Miss Harper bit her lip, torn between safety protocols and the imminent danger to the bears. Another sizable chunk of rock crumbled beneath the mother bear's weight, eliciting gasps from the children. All right, she conceded. But we need to be extremely careful about how we do this. We'll need to get the food to them somehow, said Noah, looking at the distance between their trail and the bear's ledge. I can do it, offered Owen, pulling out his slingshot from his pocket. My aim is pretty good. Miss Harper's eyes widened. Owen Wilson. You know that's not allowed on school property or field trips. Owen had the decency to look sheepish. Sorry, Miss Harper, but maybe just this once? Before she could answer, a rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. The gathering storm was moving in faster than expected, dark clouds now blotting out the sun. A few drops of rain splattered against the dusty trail. We need to hurry, urged Mia, looking nervously at the sky. If it starts pouring, the whole ledge might collapse. And we'll have to leave for safety, added Miss Harper, her teacher instincts kicking in. I can't keep you all up here in a thunderstorm. The urgency of their situation sparked a flurry of activity. The children worked quickly, breaking their food into small pieces that Owen could launch with his slingshot. Zoe and Liam collaborated on creating a systematic plan for where to place each morsel to create the most effective path away from danger. We should start with something really smelly, suggested Liam. Something they can't resist. Ruby silently opened her lunchbox and pulled out a glass jar. Inside was a golden substance that caught the dim light. Honey, she said softly, my grandmother makes it. The children stared at her in amazement. Ruby, that's perfect, exclaimed Mia, giving the quiet girl a spontaneous hug that made her blush. Owen carefully loaded a piece of sandwich soaked with honey onto his slingshot. He took aim, pulled back the elastic, and released. The food arced through the air, landing just a few feet from the bears. The mother bear's nose twitched, but she remained focused on protecting her cub. Try again, urged Noah. A little closer. Owen's second shot landed even closer. This time, the mother bear turned her head, nostrils flaring as she caught the scent of honey. The children held their breath. Would she take the bait? For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, cautiously, the mother bear eased forward, stretching her neck to sniff the food while keeping her body between her cub and the cliff edge. It's working, whispered Zoe, clutching Mia's arm in excitement. Owen prepared another honey-soaked morsel, aiming farther along the ledge in the direction they wanted the bears to travel. The shot flew true, landing on a more stable section of rock. The mother bear hesitated, clearly torn between the tempting food and her instinct to stay put. Thunder cracked overhead, louder this time, and the first real drops of rain began to fall. The rocky ledge beneath the bear's paws grew slick with moisture. The situation was becoming more perilous by the second. They need to move now, Miss Harper said, concern etched across her face. That ledge won't hold much longer in this rain. As if understanding the direness of their situation, the mother bear made a decision. She nudged her cub with her nose, urging it toward the food. The little bear, still whimpering, took tentative steps forward, following the scent trail Owen was creating one shot at a time. The children worked in frantic harmony, Liam and Ruby preparing the bait, Owen making the shots, and the others offering guidance on placement. Yard by precarious yard, the bears moved along the ledge, away from the most damaged section and toward potential safety. It's going to work, Noah breathed, hardly daring to believe it. They're almost to the wider part. At that moment, a blinding flash of lightning split the sky, followed immediately by a deafening crash of thunder. The sudden noise spooked the bears, particularly the cub, who jumped in fright. What happened next seemed to unfold in terrible, slow motion. The cub's sudden movement caused it to slip on the rain-slicked stone. Its small paws scrambled for purchase, but found none. With a terrified squeal, it began to slide toward the edge. The mother bear roared in panic, lunging to catch her baby. She managed to grasp the cub's scruff with her teeth, but the sudden motion caused more of the ledge to crumble beneath her own weight. Now, both bears were in imminent danger of plummeting to the canyon floor. "No!" screamed Zoe, tears mixing with raindrops on her face. Without warning, Ruby darted forward, breaking away from the group before anyone could stop her. She scrambled toward a narrow path that descended slightly, bringing her closer to the bear's level. "Ruby, stop!" Miss Harper shouted, reaching for her too late. "It's too dangerous." But Ruby was already moving with surprising speed and agility, her small feet finding secure holds in the wet rock. The other children watched in horror and awe as their quiet classmate positioned herself on a rock shelf, just 15 feet from the struggling bears. "What is she doing?" gasped Mia, her hands pressed against her mouth. Ruby reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. It caught the dim light as she raised it to her lips. "Is that a whistle?" Noah wondered aloud. A clear, musical note pierced the air, rising above the storm's rumble. The sound was nothing like a regular whistle. It had a haunting, almost melodic quality that seemed oddly familiar to the bears. The mother bear's ears perked up, her attention momentarily diverted from their precarious situation. Ruby played another sequence of notes, her fingers moving over what they now could see was some kind of small flute or pipe. The mother bear's frantic movements slowed, and remarkably she began to shift her weight, redistributing it more evenly across what remained of the ledge. "How is she doing that?" whispered Owen in disbelief. Miss Harper shook her head, equally mystified. "I have no idea." The rain was falling harder now, plastering Ruby's dark hair to her face, but her melody continued, guiding the bears with sound rather than food. Somehow, impossibly, it seemed to be working. The mother bear found more secure footing and managed to pull her cub back from the edge. Then Ruby gestured with one hand, continuing to play with the other, making a clear, "follow me" motion. To the astonishment of everyone watching, the bears began to move in the direction she indicated, away from the crumbling section and toward the wider part of the ledge that led to safety. "Miss Harper," Noah said quietly, "I don't understand what's happening." Their teacher placed a steadying hand on his shoulder, her eyes never leaving Ruby. "Neither do I, Noah. But whatever it is, it might be those bears' only chance." The sky opened up completely now, rain pouring down in sheets. The visibility worsened, but they could still make out Ruby's small form, standing firm despite the elements, her mysterious music somehow cutting through the storm's roar. And the bears were moving steadily now, following the sound like it was a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. "We need to get to shelter," Miss Harper said reluctantly, eyeing the lightning flashing across the sky. "This storm is getting too dangerous." "We can't leave Ruby," Mia protested. "And the bears still aren't safe," added Zoe. Miss Harper's face showed her internal struggle, her responsibility to keep her students safe warring with the unfolding rescue attempt that seemed nothing short of miraculous. "There's a small cave about 50 yards back," offered Liam. "We passed it on the way up. We could wait there and watch from a distance." Miss Harper nodded gratefully. "Good thinking, Liam. Everyone, Gather your things. We'll move to the cave, but keep sight of Ruby if possible." As they hurriedly collected their scattered belongings, Noah noticed something odd about Ruby's backpack, which she'd left behind in her rush to help the bears. A small corner of what looked like an old leather-bound book peeked out from an unzipped pocket. On its visible spine were strange symbols Noah had never seen before. "Noah, come on," called Owen, already helping the others move toward shelter. Noah hesitated, then quickly zipped Ruby's backpack closed and added it to his own belongings. Whatever secrets their new classmate harbored, they would have to wait. Right now, all that mattered was that somehow, against all odds, she was saving those bears. As the group retreated toward the cave, Noah cast one last glance over his shoulder. Through the curtain of rain, he could just make out Ruby's silhouette, still standing firm on her rock shelf, her mysterious melody continuing to guide the bears toward safety. Lightning illuminated the scene briefly, and in that flash, Noah could have sworn he saw something impossible. A faint, glowing light surrounding Ruby's small form and extending toward the bears like a protective shield. He blinked, and it was gone, leaving him to wonder if it had been real or merely a trick of the storm. Either way, one thing was certain. This field trip had taken a turn that none of them could have possibly anticipated. And it was far from over. The small cave provided welcome shelter from the intensifying storm. Water streamed down its entrance, creating a shimmering curtain through which the children anxiously peered, straining to see what was happening with Ruby and the bears. "I can't see anything," complained Owen, wiping condensation from his glasses for the third time. "The rain's too heavy." Miss Harper paced the limited space of their rocky haven, her phone still showing no signal. "Daisy should have reached the Rangers by now. Help has to be on the way." "But will it come in time?" whispered Zoe, hugging her knees to her chest. Lightning illuminated the mountainside in brief, electric flashes, giving them glimpses of the ongoing rescue attempt. Ruby remained on her rock shelf, seemingly oblivious to the deluge soaking her to the skin. The haunting melody of her strange instrument occasionally reached them between thunderclaps, carried on gusts of wind. "I don't understand," Mia said, breaking the tense silence. "How does Ruby know how to do whatever it is she's doing? And what is that thing she's playing?" added Liam. "It doesn't look like any instrument I've ever seen." Noah's hand instinctively moved to his backpack, where Ruby's belongings were safely stowed. The mysterious book with its strange symbols weighed on his mind. Should he mention it? Before he could decide, a particularly violent gust of wind howled through the canyon, bringing with it a sound that made their blood run cold, a high-pitched, terrified scream. "That's Ruby!" Zoe jumped to her feet, rushing toward the cave entrance. Miss Harper caught her arm. "Zoe, wait! It's too dangerous to—" Another flash of lightning revealed a horrifying scene. The section of rock shelf where Ruby had been standing had partially collapsed. The girl was now clinging to what remained with one hand, her body dangling precariously over the canyon. The bears had made it to a wider part of the ledge, but they'd stopped moving, the mother bear looking back toward Ruby as if sensing her distress. "She's going to fall!" Owen shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Without hesitation, Noah bolted from the cave, ignoring Miss Harper's desperate calls for him to come back. The rain lashed at his face as he ran, following the narrow path that Ruby had taken earlier. His feet slipped on the wet stone, but somehow he maintained his balance, driven by a singular purpose. Noah. Miss Harper's voice faded behind him, lost in the storm's fury. As he neared Ruby's position, he could see that her situation was even more dire than it had appeared from a distance. The rock shelf had broken away completely on one side, leaving her hanging by her fingertips. Her face was pale with fear and exertion, her knuckles white as she struggled to maintain her grip. "Hold on," Noah called, stretching out as far as he dared on his section of the path, but he was still at least 6 feet away from her, an impossible distance to bridge. Ruby's eyes met his, wide with terror, but also something else. Resignation? "The bears," she gasped through chattering teeth. "Are they safe?" "They're on the wider ledge, but they've stopped moving," Noah explained, frantically looking around for anything that might help him reach her. "Why did they stop? Can you play that thing again?" Ruby shook her head weakly. "I dropped it when the rock gave way. It's gone." A sob escaped her throat. "I failed them." "No, you didn't," Noah insisted. "They're away from the dangerous part now. You saved them." "Not yet," Ruby whispered. "They won't go all the way without guidance. They're waiting for me." Noah didn't understand how she could possibly know this, but the certainty in her voice was unmistakable. He glanced back to where the bears remained stationary, the mother occasionally looking in their direction as if confirming Ruby's words. The rain was coming down even harder now, making everything slick and treacherous. Noah could see Ruby's fingers slowly losing their battle with the wet stone. "Ruby, I need to get help," he said desperately. "I can't reach you from here." "There's no time," she replied, a strange calm suddenly replacing the fear in her eyes. "Noah, listen carefully. In my backpack there's a book. You need to—" Her words were cut short as her grip finally failed. With a scream that would haunt Noah's nightmares forever, Ruby plummeted away from the ledge, her small body disappearing into the misty abyss below. "Ruby!" Noah's anguished cry echoed across the canyon, lost in a crash of thunder that seemed to mark the terrible moment. He sank to his knees in shock, rain mingling with hot tears on his face. This couldn't be happening. This was supposed to be a simple field trip, a day of learning about nature. Not this, never this. A low, mournful sound drew his attention back to the bears. The mother bear was making a keening noise unlike anything Noah had ever heard, almost as if she too understood the tragedy that had just unfolded. The cub pressed against its mother, seemingly seeking comfort. Numb with grief and shock, Noah somehow found the strength to stand. He had to get back to the others, to tell them what had happened. As he turned to retrace his steps, a strange movement in his peripheral vision made him pause. Far below, where Ruby should have hit the canyon floor, a swirling mist had formed. It wasn't behaving like normal fog. It was moving upward, spiraling against gravity, gathering intensity with each passing second. And at its center, a pinpoint of light was growing. The same unearthly glow Noah had glimpsed around Ruby earlier. What the— Noah rubbed his eyes, certain he was hallucinating from trauma and guilt. But the phenomenon continued, the light expanding, the mist climbing, and then, impossibly, a shape began to form within it, a human shape rising from the depths. Noah's mouth fell open as Ruby emerged from the swirling vapors, her body suspended in midair, surrounded by that strange, luminous aura. Her eyes were closed, her face serene, as if she were merely sleeping. The mist carried her upward, past Noah's position, rising to the level where the bears waited. "This isn't real," Noah whispered to himself, backing away. "It can't be real." Yet the bears reacted to the apparition, the mother rising onto her hind legs as Ruby's floating form approached them. The glowing mist deposited the girl gently onto the ledge beside the animals. And then, to Noah's utter disbelief, Ruby's eyes fluttered open. She sat up slowly, looking around in confusion before her gaze settled on the bears. A smile of recognition spread across her face, and she reached out one hand to touch the mother bear's muzzle with a familiarity that seemed impossible. Noah remained frozen in place, unable to process what he was witnessing. Ruby was alive somehow, and the bears were not attacking her. So instead, they were behaving like old friends reunited after a long separation. Ruby stood shakily, placing one hand on the mother bear's massive shoulder to steady herself. Then she turned and looked directly at Noah, her eyes now shining with the same unearthly light that surrounded her. "Go back to the others," she called, her voice carrying over the storm with unnatural clarity. "Tell them I'm okay and that I'll meet you all back at the trailhead." "But how?" Noah stammered, his mind reeling. "You fell. I saw you fall." Ruby's expression was both ancient and childlike at once, a paradox that sent shivers down Noah's spine. "All will be explained in time. The book will tell you what you need to know." She patted the mother bear's fur. "Now, I must finish what I started. These two need to go home." Before Noah could respond, Ruby turned away and began walking along the ledge, the bears following her obediently. Within moments, they disappeared around a bend in the mountainside, leaving Noah alone in the rain with questions that defied all rational explanation. Thunder rumbled overhead, snapping him out of his stunned trance. Whatever had just happened, whatever impossible thing he had just witnessed, the others needed to know. Miss Harper would be frantic with worry about both of them by now. His legs felt like lead as he made his way back to the cave, his mind replaying Ruby's miraculous resurrection in an endless loop. None of it made sense. People didn't survive falls like that. They didn't float back up in glowing mists, and they certainly didn't communicate with wild bears as if they were household pets. Yet he had seen it with his own eyes, and now he carried the weight of a story so outlandish that he doubted anyone would believe him. As the cave came into view, he saw his classmates huddled at the entrance, their faces masks of worry. Miss Harper spotted him first, relief flooding her features. "Noah, thank heavens!" She rushed forward to meet him, her hands gripping his shoulders as if to assure herself he was real. "What were you thinking, running off like that? You could have been killed." The others crowded around, all talking at once. "Did you find Ruby? Is she okay? What happened out there?" Noah opened his mouth, then closed it again. How could he possibly explain what he had witnessed? They would think he'd lost his mind, that the trauma of watching Ruby fall had caused him to hallucinate. "Noah?" Miss Harper prompted gently, noticing his struggle. "Where's Ruby?" He took a deep breath. She's okay." It wasn't a lie, not exactly, though it omitted the impossible events between her fall and her current state. "She's helping the bears find their way down the mountain. She said she'll meet us back at the trailhead." Miss Harper's face showed her confusion and concern. "But how?" The ledge looked like it collapsed. "We saw her hanging there and then—" She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. "I don't really understand it either," Noah admitted, which was perhaps the most truthful statement he could make. "But she's alive, Miss Harper, I swear it." Skeptical glances passed between his classmates. "Maybe you just thought you saw her fall," suggested Owen kindly. "The lightning and rain could have played tricks on your eyes." Noah knew what he had seen, but he also recognized the futility of trying to convince them. Instead, he simply nodded. "Maybe. All I know is she's okay, and she's with the bears." A crackling voice from Miss Harper's radio interrupted the conversation, a welcome distraction from the uncomfortable direction it was taking. "Silver Trail Rescue Team to hiking party. Do you copy?" "Over." Miss Harper fumbled with the radio in surprise. "This is Park Ranger Stations, right? Yes, we copy. Over." We received your emergency alert. What's your situation? Over. We have a student potentially missing, Miss Harper replied, glancing at Noah with uncertainty. And there were 2 bears trapped on an unstable ledge. We're currently sheltering in a cave about halfway up Silver Trail. Over. Copy that. We have 2 teams en route to your location. ETA approximately 20 minutes, weather permitting. Please remain sheltered until we arrive. Over. Understood. Thank you. Over and out. Miss Harper lowered the radio, looking marginally more relieved. Help is coming. Let's just stay put until then. The children settled back into the cave, the atmosphere heavy with unasked questions. Noah sat apart from the others, his thoughts consumed by what he had witnessed and Ruby's cryptic message about the book. The book. It was still in his backpack, where he'd stored it with Ruby's other belongings. With everyone distracted by the arrival of the rescue teams, now might be his only chance to examine it without drawing attention. Carefully, he unzipped his backpack and extracted the leather-bound volume. Up close, it was even more unusual than he had initially thought. The leather had an iridescent quality, shifting colors subtly as he turned it in his hands. The strange symbols on the spine seemed to move too, rearranging themselves when viewed from different angles. Noah hesitated before opening it. Part of him feared what he might find inside, feared the confirmation that something truly beyond his understanding was occurring. Yet Ruby had specifically mentioned the book, had told him it would explain what he needed to know. Taking a deep breath, he cracked open the ancient cover. The first page contained a single line of text in an elegant, flowing script. To those who hear the whispers of the wilderness, this guide is entrusted. Noah turned to the next page, and the next, his eyes widening with each revelation. The book was filled with detailed illustrations of animals, not just bears but wolves, eagles, deer, and countless others, accompanied by notations in the same strange script. Interspersed were drawings of what appeared to be musical instruments, including the very flute or pipe that Ruby had used to communicate with the bears. Most astonishing of all were the depictions of human figures surrounded by the same glowing aura he had witnessed around Ruby. Some were shown floating above chasms, others walking unharmed through raging fires, still others breathing underwater. "What are you reading?" Noah jumped at the sound of Zoe's voice right beside him. He hadn't noticed her approach. Quickly, he tried to close the book, but she had already caught a glimpse of its contents. "Is that rubies?" she asked, her curious eyes fixed on the partially visible illustrations. "I found it." Noah hedged, not quite meeting her gaze. It fell out of her backpack when she ran to help the bears. Zoe sat down next to him, lowering her voice. "There's something weird about Ruby, isn't there? I mean, beyond being the new kid who never talks?" Noah hesitated. Zoe was one of the smartest people he knew, and also one of the most open-minded. If anyone might believe what he had seen, it would be her. "If I tell you something," he whispered, "do you promise not to think I'm crazy?" Zoe nodded solemnly, her eyes serious behind her rain-spattered glasses. Over the next few minutes, Noah recounted everything. Ruby's fall, the mysterious mist, her impossible return, and her strange communion with the bears. As expected, Zoe's expression shifted from curiosity to disbelief to concern. "Noah," she said gently when he finished, "I know you believe what you saw. But people don't survive falls like that. It's just not possible." "I know what I saw, Zoe," he insisted, his frustration building. "And this book, it shows people doing impossible things. Things like what Ruby did." Zoe glanced at the open page, her scientific mind clearly struggling with the implications. "May I?" she asked, reaching for the book. Noah hesitated, then handed it over. Zoe flipped through the pages with growing fascination, stopping occasionally to examine particular illustrations more closely. "This is," she began, then trailed off, unable to find the right words. "Crazy? Impossible?" Noah suggested bitterly. "No," Zoe replied slowly. "It's methodical. Look at these notations, these diagrams. This isn't some fairy tale book. It's more like a scientific manual." Noah blinked in surprise. That wasn't the reaction he had expected. "What do you mean?" Zoe pointed to one of the illustrations, a detailed drawing of a person surrounded by concentric rings of energy, with precise measurements and annotations. "This is structured like research, like someone was documenting observable phenomena and cataloging the results." She turned to a page showing the very instrument Ruby had used. "And look here, these aren't random notes, it's a frequency chart." Her finger traced the lines connecting specific musical notations to different animal reactions. "If these markings mean what I think they do, this is showing how different sound patterns affect different species." Noah stared at her in amazement. "So, you believe me?" "About what happened to Ruby?" Zoe closed the book carefully, her expression thoughtful. "I believe that you saw something you can't explain. And I believe that this book contains information that doesn't fit into our current understanding of how the world works." She handed the volume back to him. "But most of all, I believe that Ruby has a lot of explaining to do when we see her again." A commotion at the cave entrance interrupted their conversation. 2 park rangers in rain gear had arrived, bringing with them powerful flashlights that cut through the gloom. "Everyone okay in here?" called the taller ranger, pushing back his hood to reveal a weathered face with kind eyes. His name badge identified him as Ranger Martinez. "Yes, we're all fine," Miss Harper replied, visibly relieved at their arrival. "Though we may be missing a student. The children seem to think she's okay, but let's sort all that out once we get you folks to safety," suggested the second ranger, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. "The storm's getting worse, and these mountains can be treacherous in heavy rain." As the rangers organized the group for evacuation, Noah quickly stowed Ruby's book back in his backpack. His mind was racing with questions that only Ruby could answer, and a growing certainty that their extraordinary adventure was far from concluded. The trek back down the mountain was slower and more arduous than their ascent had been. The rangers led the way, securing ropes along the most treacherous sections to ensure everyone's safety. The rain continued to pour, turning parts of the trail into small streams that threatened to wash away their footing. Noah and Zoe stayed at the back of the group, occasionally exchanging meaningful glances but saying little. The weight of their shared secret created a bond between them, a feeling that they alone understood the true significance of what had transpired on the mountainside. As they rounded a bend in the trail, Noah caught a glimpse of movement in the forest below. Squinting through the rain, he could just make out 3 figures moving among the trees. 2 large, 1 small, the bears and Ruby. He nudged Zoe and pointed. She followed his gaze, her eyes widening as she too spotted the unlikely trio making their way down the mountain through a route parallel to their own. "She really is with them," Zoe whispered, awe evident in her voice. "How is that possible?" Noah shook his head. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." The base of the trail finally came into view, along with the welcome sight of the park's main ranger station. Several emergency vehicles were parked outside, their lights flashing through the rain. A small crowd of concerned park staff had gathered under the station's wide porch. As the bedraggled group emerged from the trail, they were quickly ushered inside the warm, dry building. Park medics handed out blankets and began checking the children for injuries, while Miss Harper gave a detailed report to the head ranger. And that's when the bears became trapped on the ledge, she was explaining. The children tried to help by creating a food trail to lead them to safety. Brave kids, commented the head ranger, but incredibly dangerous. Wild bears are unpredictable, especially mothers with cubs. I know, admitted Miss Harper. In retrospect, I should have prevented it. But they were so determined, and the situation was deteriorating so quickly. Noah tuned out their conversation, his attention fixed on the large windows overlooking the forest edge. Any minute now, Ruby would emerge. Any minute, she would have to explain herself to everyone. But as the minutes stretched into a half hour, and then an hour, with no sign of Ruby or the bears, Noah began to worry. Had something happened to her after all? Had he imagined her miraculous survival? The radio on the head ranger's belt crackled to life. Team B to base. We've completed a sweep of the western slope. No sign of the missing student or the bears. Over. Noah exchanged a concerned glance with Zoe. Where had Ruby gone? A commotion at the station entrance drew everyone's attention. The door swung open, letting in a gust of wet air, and a small, bedraggled figure that could only be Daisy Turner, the runner who had been sent for help at the very beginning of their ordeal. "Daisy!" exclaimed Miss Harper, rushing to embrace the soaking wet girl. "Thank goodness you're safe. We were starting to worry about you, too." Daisy looked confused. "Too? Did something happen to someone else?" Before Miss Harper could explain about Ruby, another voice spoke from the doorway. A quiet, familiar voice that made Noah's heart skip a beat. "I'm here, Miss Harper. I'm okay." All heads turned to see Ruby standing in the entrance, her clothes completely dry despite the pouring rain outside, her expression serene. There was no sign of the bears, nothing to indicate the impossible events Noah had witnessed. "Ruby!" Miss Harper's relief was palpable as she hurried to the girl's side. "Where have you been? How did you get here? We were so worried." Ruby's eyes briefly met Noah's across the room, a silent message passing between them. "I found a different path down," she said simply. "The bears showed me the way." The rangers exchanged skeptical glances. "Young lady," said the head ranger kindly but firmly, "bears don't generally guide people through forests. They avoid human contact whenever possible." Ruby shrugged, her face the picture of innocence. Maybe these bears were different. "She's not lying," Noah found himself saying, stepping forward despite the warning look Zoe shot him. "I saw her with the bears. They were helping her." This declaration was met with indulgent smiles from the adults and curious stares from his classmates. "It's been a very stressful day," Miss Harper said gently, placing a hand on Noah's shoulder. "I think we're all a bit confused and overwrought." But Noah began to protest. "It's okay," Ruby interrupted softly. "They don't need to understand." The quiet conviction in her voice caused the adults to exchange concerned glances. "Well," the head ranger said, clearing his throat, "the important thing is that everyone is safe. We'll need statements from all of you for our incident report, but that can wait until you've had a chance to rest and dry off." As the group dispersed around the station, some heading to the bathrooms to change into dry clothes, others calling parents on the station's landline, Ruby approached Noah and Zoe. "You have my book," she said without preamble, her eyes fixed on Noah's backpack. It wasn't a question, but Noah nodded anyway. "I was keeping it safe for you, after what happened on the ledge." Ruby held out her hand expectantly. "Not until you explain," Zoe interjected, her scientific curiosity overwhelming her usual politeness. "What are you?" How did you survive that fall? How can you communicate with bears? Ruby withdrew her hand, studying them both with an intensity that belied her small stature and quiet demeanor. Finally, she sighed. "Not here," she whispered. "Too many ears. Meet me outside behind the ranger station in 15 minutes. Bring the book." Without waiting for their response, she turned and melted into the crowd of children being examined by the medics. Noah and Zoe exchanged a look that contained equal parts excitement and apprehension. "Are we really doing this?" Zoe asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Noah nodded. "Don't you want to know the truth?" "Of course I do," Zoe admitted. "But what if the truth is, I don't know, dangerous or crazy?" "It already is both of those things," Noah pointed out. "We just don't understand why yet." The 15 minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Noah and Zoe made a show of getting checked by the medics, accepting hot cocoa from the station's small kitchen, and generally behaving as if they weren't about to sneak out for a clandestine meeting with a girl who had apparently cheated death and befriended wild bears. Finally, when no one seemed to be paying particular attention to them, they slipped out a side door and made their way around to the back of the ranger station. The rain had finally begun to let up, reduced to a gentle drizzle that misted their faces as they scanned the tree line. "Do you see her?" Zoe whispered, adjusting her glasses against the moisture. Noah was about to reply when a soft voice spoke directly behind them. "I'm here." They both jumped and spun around. Ruby stood just a few feet away, though neither of them had heard her approach. Something about her seemed different now. There was a subtle confidence in her posture that hadn't been there before, an ancient wisdom in her eyes that contrasted sharply with her young face. "You have questions," she stated simply. "About 1,000,000, confirmed Zoe, finding her voice first. "Starting with how you survived falling off that cliff." Ruby extended her hand once more. "The book first?" Noah hesitated, his hand instinctively tightening on his backpack strap. "How do we know you'll answer our questions if I give it to you?" A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed Ruby's face. "You don't, but the book belongs to me and it's dangerous in the wrong hands." "Dangerous? How?" pressed Zoe, ever analytical. "It's just information, isn't it? Knowledge." Ruby's expression grew solemn. "Knowledge is the most dangerous thing in the world when people don't understand its responsibility." She looked directly at Noah. "You saw what happened on the mountain. You know this isn't ordinary." Noah slowly unzipped his backpack and removed the leather-bound volume. He held it out but didn't immediately release it when Ruby reached for it. "Trade," he said firmly. "The book for answers. Real ones." Ruby studied him for a long moment, then nodded. 3 questions each. That's fair." Noah relaxed his grip, allowing Ruby to take the book. She clutched it to her chest with obvious relief, running her fingers over the cover in a gesture that seemed almost like a caress. "First question," Noah said without hesitation. "What are you?" "Because after what I saw today, I'm pretty sure you're not just a 5th grader." Ruby smiled faintly. "That's complicated. I am a 5th grader, 10 years old, just like you. But I'm also something else." She opened the book to a particular page and showed them an illustration of human figures surrounded by an ethereal glow. "My family calls us keepers. We protect the bond between humanity and the natural world." "Bond?" questioned Zoe. "What bond?" "Most humans destroy nature, not protect it." Ruby nodded sadly. "That's part of the problem. The bond has weakened over centuries as people became disconnected from the wilderness. My ancestors were shamans, druids, animal speakers, those who could communicate with the natural world directly. Now, there are very few of us left. Noah struggled to process this. It sounded like something from a fantasy novel, yet he had witnessed impossible things with his own eyes. So, that thing you were playing, the flute or whatever, that lets you talk to animals. Not exactly talk, Ruby corrected, turning to another page in the book. It's more like sharing emotions, intentions. Different patterns of sound resonate with different species. Bears respond to certain harmonics that remind them of their own vocalizations. She smiled slightly. It's a language of feeling, not words. That's my first question, Zoe interjected. How did you know those bears needed help in the first place? We all just happened to see them on the cliff, but you seemed prepared. Ruby's fingers traced the strange symbols on the book's spine. I felt them. Keepers develop sensitivities to distress in the natural world, especially when animals are in danger. It's like hearing a cry for help, but inside your mind. She looked between them, gauging their reactions. That's why my family moved to Whispering Pines. These mountains are ancient, powerful. There's been a keeper in this region for generations, but the last one died 3 years ago. The balance has been disrupted since then. What balance? Noah asked, fascinated despite his lingering skepticism. That's your second question, Ruby reminded him with a small smile. The balance between wilderness and civilization, between the needs of humans and the needs of every other living thing. She gazed toward the forest, where the storm clouds were finally beginning to break apart. When the balance tips too far, bad things happen. More dangerous encounters between humans and wildlife, more natural disasters, more suffering on both sides. That sounds, Zoe hesitated, looking for the right word. Unscientific? Suggested Ruby. I know. But science hasn't explained everything yet. There are forces in nature that modern instruments can't measure, connections that modern theories can't account for. Noah thought about his next question carefully. The fall. I saw you fall from that ledge. No one could have survived that. But then there was this mist and you just floated back up. How? Ruby's expression grew distant. That's something only the most gifted keepers can do. We call it the embrace. The natural world itself protects us in moments of greatest need, but only when our purpose is pure, our intention selfless. She smiled faintly. I wasn't trying to save myself. I was only thinking about the bears, about finishing what I started. That's when the embrace happens. So, the mist, Noah began. The very essence of the mountain itself, Ruby explained. Water, air, spirit, all combined to catch me. It doesn't happen often. This was my first time. Her hand trembled slightly as she adjusted her grip on the book. It was overwhelming. Zoe had been unusually quiet, her scientific mind clearly struggling with concepts that defied rational explanation. Finally, she asked, Your parents, are they like you? Keepers? My mother was, Ruby answered softly. She trained me since I was very young. My father isn't a keeper by blood, but he understands and supports our work. He's a wildlife biologist. He studies the same connections I feel, just through a different lens. Was? Noah picked up on the past tense immediately. Your mother? Ruby's eyes clouded with sadness. My second question answer. She died last year, trying to prevent a forest fire in Colorado. The embrace didn't come for her. She swallowed hard. Sometimes the sacrifice is necessary. She knew that. An uncomfortable silence fell over the three children, the weight of Ruby's revelation hanging heavily in the damp air. I'm sorry, Noah said eventually, meaning it. Ruby nodded in acknowledgement. Final questions? Noah and Zoe exchanged glances, both aware that they had one question remaining. "The bears," Zoe said finally. "Where are they now? Are they safe?" Relief washed over Ruby's face, perhaps grateful for the change in subject. "Yes, they're safe. I guided them to a secure den about a mile from here. They'll stay there until the storm passes completely." She smiled. The cub was actually born last spring. They were separated from their usual territory by a recent forest clearing operation on the north side of the mountain. The mother was trying to find a new route to their winter grounds when they became trapped on that ledge. "Will they be okay now?" Noah asked, genuinely concerned. Ruby nodded. "That path I showed them leads to a protected valley with plenty of food sources. They'll thrive there." She paused, then added, "That wasn't your last question, by the way." It was implied in Zoe's. Noah thought carefully. This was his final opportunity to understand the impossible events of the day. What did he most need to know? "The book," he said finally. "What exactly is it? And why is it dangerous?" Ruby's expression grew serious as she opened the volume, revealing pages of illustrations and the strange, flowing script. "This is the Codex Naturalis, the living record of all keeper knowledge gathered across thousands of years. It contains the harmonics for communicating with hundreds of species, the rituals for healing damaged ecosystems, the methods for sensing imbalances." She hesitated. "And yes, the conditions required for the embrace and other manifestations that your world would call impossible." "Living record?" Zoe picked up on the unusual phrasing. "It changes," Ruby explained. "New discoveries appear on its pages. Outdated information fades away. The book adapts as the world changes." She ran her fingers over a page that seemed to shimmer beneath her touch. "And it chooses its keeper. It wouldn't work for anyone else. At best, it would show them only what they could handle. At worst—" "At worst?" Noah prompted when she trailed off. Ruby closed the book with a snap. "At worst, it drives them mad, with glimpses of truths their minds aren't prepared to accept." Her gaze hardened. "That's why I needed it back. Not just for my sake, but for yours." Noah felt a chill run down his spine. He had spent over an hour with that book in his possession. What might have happened if he'd looked deeper into its secrets? "So now what?" Zoe asked, practical as always. "You've got your book back. Are you going to make us forget what we saw? Swear us to secrecy? What happens next?" Ruby seemed surprised by the question. "I can't make you forget. That's not how keeper abilities work. We guide and protect. We don't control." She studied them both intently. "As for secrecy, would anyone believe you if you told them?" Noah considered this. The truth was, even with Zoe's corroboration, their story would sound like pure fantasy. They'd likely be referred to counseling for shared delusions. "Probably not," he admitted. "But that doesn't answer what happens next," Zoe persisted. Ruby's expression softened. "Next, we go back inside before they notice we're missing. We give our statements about a regular, if frightening, field trip adventure. You tell them I found a different path down the mountain, and I was lucky. No one questions it too deeply because the alternative seems impossible." She tucked the book into her own backpack. "And tomorrow we return to being normal fifth graders." Just like that? Noah couldn't hide his disappointment. After what they'd witnessed, returning to normal seemed wrong somehow. "Not exactly like that," Ruby replied with a small smile. "You've seen things most people never will. You've glimpsed the deeper connections in the world. That changes a person." She hesitated, then added, "And maybe, sometimes, I might need help." Noah and Zoe both straightened at this. Help with what? Zoe asked cautiously. Being a keeper is a big responsibility, Ruby explained. Sometimes too big for one person, especially someone my age. My mother used to help the previous keeper in these mountains. She wasn't a keeper herself then, but she understood the importance of the work. There's a tradition of keepers having trusted friends who know the truth. You want us to be your, assistants? Noah wasn't sure how he felt about that. Ruby shook her head. Not assistants, friends, allies. She looked suddenly vulnerable, just a 10-year-old girl with too much responsibility on her small shoulders. It gets lonely, being the only one who knows. The simple honesty of this admission touched something in Noah. He remembered how Ruby had sat alone at lunch every day since arriving at their school, how she never joined in games at recess, how she always seemed to be watching the world from a slight distance. I'm in, he said before he could second-guess himself. Noah. Zoe looked shocked. We don't even know what we're agreeing to. Actually, we do, he countered. We're agreeing to be friends with Ruby, to help her when animals are in trouble, to keep her secret. He shrugged. Sounds a lot better than just doing homework and playing video games all the time. Zoe bit her lip, clearly torn between caution and curiosity. What exactly would we be doing? Mostly normal stuff, Ruby assured her. But sometimes, special things. Like today, but hopefully less dangerous. Helping animals that are hurt or lost. Learning about the connections most people never see. She smiled hopefully. And I could teach you some of what I know. Not the keeper abilities, those are inherited, but the knowledge, the understanding, the harmony. A faint glow seemed to emanate from Ruby as she spoke these words, though Noah couldn't be sure if it was a trick of the clearing weather or another manifestation of her unusual. Zoe adjusted her glasses, her logical mind visibly working through the possibilities. I want to understand it, she admitted finally. Scientifically, I mean. There must be explanations for what you can do, even if they're explanations science hasn't discovered yet. Ruby nodded. That's exactly the kind of thinking that helps keepers evolve their knowledge. The Codex doesn't just preserve ancient wisdom, it grows with new understanding. Then, I'm in, too, Zoe decided. But I have conditions, no unnecessary risks, no lying to our parents without good reason, and you have to be honest with us, no more cryptic half-answers. Agreed, Ruby said immediately, extending her hand. Friends? Noah placed his hand atop hers without hesitation. Friends. After a moment's pause, Zoe added her hand to the stack. Friends, though I still think we're all going to need therapy eventually. The three children shared a laugh, a moment of normalcy in a day that had been anything but normal. We should get back, Ruby said, glancing toward the ranger station. They'll be looking for us soon. As they walked back around the building, Noah noticed something odd. Hey, how did you get your clothes dry so fast? You were soaked on the mountain. Ruby smiled enigmatically. Third question. You'll have to save it for next time. Before Noah could protest, the ranger station door swung open, and Miss Harper's worried face appeared. There you are. We've been looking everywhere for you three. The buses are here to take us back to school. Sorry, Miss Harper, Zoe said smoothly. We were just getting some fresh air after the storm. Well, come along now. Your parents have been notified about the incident and they're waiting at the school to pick you up. Miss Harper ushered them inside, where the rest of the class was gathering their belongings. As they boarded the bus, Noah found himself seated next to Ruby, with Zoe across the aisle. Most of the other children were unusually subdued, the day's excitement having given way to exhaustion. Can I ask you something else? Noah whispered to Ruby as the bus pulled away from the ranger station. Not an official question, just something I'm curious about. Ruby nodded, her gaze fixed on the forest outside the window. The bears. You seem to have a special connection with them, beyond just the music from your instrument. Almost like you knew them personally. A shadow of something, sorrow, nostalgia, crossed Ruby's face. "That's perceptive of you," she murmured. "The mother bear, she knew my mother. Years ago, when she was just a cub herself, my mother saved her from a poacher's trap. Some animals remember kindnesses across generations." Noah tried to imagine it. An injured bear cub, a younger version of Ruby's mother performing the same kind of impossible rescue they had witnessed today. A chain of compassion extending through time. "Is that why you were so determined to save them? Because of your mother's connection?" Ruby shook her head slightly. "I would have tried to save them anyway. That's what keepers do. But yes, when I sensed her distress, I recognized her spirit. It felt like..." Her voice faltered. "It felt like my mother was watching. Like she'd be proud." Noah didn't know what to say to that, so he simply nodded and fell silent. The bus wound its way down the mountain roads, carrying them back toward the ordinary world of classrooms and homework and soccer practice. Yet Noah knew something had fundamentally changed. The world was larger now, deeper, more mysterious than he had ever imagined. And somehow, impossibly, he was now a part of that mystery. "Ruby," he said softly as the first houses of their town came into view. "Thank you for trusting us." Ruby turned from the window, her eyes reflecting the late afternoon sunlight in a way that seemed almost otherworldly. "I think it was always meant to be the three of us," she replied. "Some connections exist before we ever meet." The following Monday, school resumed its normal rhythm as if the extraordinary events on Silver Trail had never occurred. The official report concluded that the class had spotted 2 bears in distress, park rangers had been called, and everyone had returned safely. Ruby's alternative path down the mountain was noted but not questioned. A lucky escape by a resourceful child. Only Noah and Zoe knew the truth, exchanging meaningful glances whenever Ruby did something subtly unusual, like pausing to whisper to the birds in the schoolyard, or seeming to know exactly when a storm would break despite clear skies. It was during lunch period 3 weeks after the mountain incident that Noah first noticed something strange happening with Ruby again. She was sitting with them in the cafeteria, a new development that had raised eyebrows among their classmates, when she suddenly went very still, her sandwich halfway to her mouth. "Ruby," Zoe prompted, noticing the change immediately. "What's wrong?" Ruby's eyes had taken on a distant look, focused on something far beyond the cafeteria walls. "Something's coming," she whispered. "Something wrong." Noah and Zoe exchanged alarmed glances. "Wrong how?" Noah asked quietly, leaning closer to avoid being overheard. Ruby blinked, returning to the present with visible effort. "I'm not sure yet, but it's big, and it's headed for Whispering Pines." She looked between her new friends, her expression grave. "I think this is going to be our first test." Zoe set down her juice box with determination. "Then we'll face it together." "That's what friends do." "What friends do?" Noah echoed, feeling a mixture of fear and exhilaration at the prospect of another adventure. Outside the school windows, a raven landed on the sill, its glossy black feathers iridescent in the sunlight. It fixed its intelligent gaze directly on Ruby, cawed 3 times in what seemed like a deliberate pattern, then spread its wings and departed. Ruby's face paled as she watched it go. "What?" Noah whispered urgently. "What did it say?" "Wolves," Ruby replied, her voice barely audible. The wolves are returning to Whispering Pines, and they're bringing something with them, something that was never meant to be found. The ordinary sounds of the school cafeteria continued around them. Children laughing, milk cartons opening, teachers reminding students to clean up after themselves. But for the three friends sitting frozen at their table, the world had shifted once again, revealing yet another layer of the extraordinary reality that existed alongside the mundane. Their adventure with the bears had been just the beginning, and whatever came next would test not only their courage, but the very bonds of their newfound friendship. 2 days later, Noah found himself perched on a fallen log at the edge of the forest behind Ruby's house, watching as she consulted the Codex Naturalis. The evening air was cool, but not uncomfortably so, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Zoe sat beside him, furiously taking notes in a journal she had designated specifically for keeper research. According to the Codex, Ruby explained, carefully turning the ancient pages, wolves haven't lived in these mountains for almost a century. They were hunted to extinction locally in the 1930s. But they're back now? Noah asked, scanning the tree line nervously. The forest looked different to him since the bear incident, more alive somehow, more aware. Not exactly back, Ruby corrected. More like returning, deliberately. She frowned at a page filled with illustrations of wolves in various poses. They're being drawn here by something. Drawn by what? Zoe looked up from her notes. Food sources? Territory? Mating opportunities? Ruby shook her head. Something else. Something ... She hesitated, running her finger over text that seemed to shift and change even as she read it. Something ancient, buried long ago. Buried? Noah repeated. Like treasure? Not treasure, Ruby said grimly. More like a warning. She closed the book suddenly, raising her head to listen to something neither Noah nor Zoe could hear. They're close. 3 of them. Scouts for the main pack. How close? Zoe asked anxiously, instinctively scooting back from the forest edge. Instead of answering, Ruby reached into her pocket and withdrew her flute, the same instrument she had used to communicate with the bears. It looked deceptively ordinary in the fading light, just a small wooden pipe with holes along its length. Stay very still, she instructed her friends. Wolves are different from bears. More cautious, more intelligent. They won't approach if they feel threatened. Noah tried to control his breathing as Ruby raised the flute to her lips. The melody she played was nothing like what she had used with the bears. This was lower, more complex, with runs of notes that seemed to mimic a howl while remaining hauntingly musical. The forest fell eerily silent as the last notes faded away. Then, gradually, normal sounds resumed. Birds calling, leaves rustling in the breeze, but with an undertone of anticipation that made the hair on Noah's arms stand on end. "Did it work?" he whispered after several minutes had passed with no sign of wolves. Ruby didn't answer, her attention fixed on a particular spot between 2 ancient oak trees. Slowly, she stood, the codex clutched protectively against her chest. "There," she breathed. At first, Noah saw nothing. Then, as if materializing from the shadows themselves, a pair of amber eyes appeared, followed by the sleek gray form of a wolf. It was smaller than Noah had expected, but no less intimidating, lean and powerful, its movements graceful as it emerged cautiously from the underbrush. 2 more wolves appeared, flanking the first, their coats varying shades of gray and brown. They moved as a perfect unit, synchronized in a way that spoke of long familiarity and absolute trust. "Oh my God," Zoe whispered, her pen frozen above her notebook. "They're actually here." The lead wolf, a female, Noah somehow knew, took another step forward, her gaze fixed unwaveringly on Ruby. There was intelligence in those eyes, a calculating awareness that was almost human in its intensity. Ruby lowered the codex and took a single step toward the wolves, then sank gracefully to her knees on the forest floor. The posture should have made her vulnerable, but somehow it had the opposite effect. She looked like a priestess communing with sacred messengers. "What are they doing?" Noah barely breathed the question. "Talking," Ruby answered softly, never breaking eye contact with the lead wolf. "In their way." The wolf let out a soft sound, not quite a whine, not quite a growl, and pawed at the ground twice. Ruby nodded as if this meant something specific to her. "What did she say?" Zoe asked, her scientific curiosity temporarily overcoming her fear. "They've been traveling for many days," Ruby translated, following a call that began when the earth shook last month. The earthquake? Noah recalled the minor tremor that had rattled windows and knocked a few books off shelves 3 weeks ago. It had barely made the local news. Ruby nodded. It woke something up. Something buried deep. She listened to another series of subtle movements from the wolves. "They say others are coming, not just wolves but bears, foxes, even birds of prey, all converging here." "But why?" Zoe pressed, scribbling frantically in her notebook. "What was buried?" Ruby asked this question through a series of gentle sounds and gestures. The lead wolf's reaction was immediate and alarming. She bared her teeth and let out a low growl that made Noah and Zoe instinctively scramble backward. "It's okay," Ruby assured them, though her own expression had grown troubled. "She's not threatening us. She's afraid." A wolf afraid? Noah found this hard to believe. These predators seemed the embodiment of wilderness confidence. "Not afraid for herself," Ruby clarified. "Afraid for what might happen if the buried thing is disturbed further." She hesitated, then added, "She called it the sickness that walks." A chill ran down Noah's spine despite the mild evening. "That sounds bad." "Very bad," Ruby agreed. She exchanged another series of subtle communications with the wolf pack, then rose slowly to her feet. The wolves backed away slightly but didn't flee. "What now?" Zoe asked, her voice hushed. "Now we need to find whatever was unearthed by the earthquake before people stumble across it," Ruby said grimly. "The wolves can lead us to the general area, but they won't go too close. The wrongness of it repels them." "Wait, we're going wolf tracking? Now?" Noah glanced at his watch. "It's almost dinner time. My mom will freak out if I'm not home." "Not now," Ruby assured him. "Tomorrow, Saturday, we'll tell our parents we're going hiking, which isn't even a lie." She turned back to the wolves and made a graceful gesture that somehow conveyed both respect and dismissal. "They'll stay in this area tonight. The female, her name doesn't translate well, but it's something like Swift over Stones, says they'll wait for us at dawn." The wolves retreated into the forest with the same eerie coordination with which they had appeared, melting into the shadows until only the memory of amber eyes remained. "I can't believe that just happened," Zoe said, looking down at her notebook where she had managed to sketch a surprisingly accurate likeness of the lead wolf. "We just had a conversation with wild wolves." "Ruby had a conversation," Noah corrected. "We just watched." "For now," Ruby said with a small smile. "But the Codex says that prolonged exposure to keeper energies can sometimes awaken latent sensitivities in others. You might start to understand more than you think." This casual statement landed like a bombshell between them. "Wait," Zoe said, her eyes wide. "Are you saying we could develop abilities? Like yours?" Ruby shrugged. "Not exactly like mine. but heightened awareness, maybe? Deeper connections to specific animals or elements? It's rare, but it happens, especially with young people whose minds are still flexible, still open to possibilities. Noah wasn't sure how he felt about this revelation. On one hand, the idea of developing a special connection to the natural world was thrilling. On the other, he had witnessed the burden that Ruby carried with her gifts. "Is that why you chose us?" he asked suddenly. "Because we might have this potential?" Ruby looked surprised. "I didn't choose you. The circumstances did." She glanced down at the codex in her hands. Though perhaps not entirely by chance. The book has a way of bringing together those who are needed. "For what?" Zoe asked. "For balance," Ruby answered simply. "Now, come on. We should get back before our parents start worrying. Tomorrow, we'll meet at the big oak by Crawford Creek, just after sunrise. Bring water, food, and anything you might need for a day in the forest." As they walked back through the growing twilight toward Ruby's house, a surprisingly normal-looking split level at the edge of the development, Noah couldn't shake the lingering image of those intelligent wolf eyes, or the ominous phrase, "the sickness that walks." Whatever adventure awaited them tomorrow, he suspected it would make their encounter with the bears seem like a mere prelude. Noah barely slept that night, his dreams filled with running wolves and strange glowing objects buried in the earth. He woke before his alarm, packed his backpack with supplies, water bottles, sandwiches, a first aid kit, his camera and a flashlight, and slipped out of the house just as the first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern mountains. His parents wouldn't be up for hours on a Saturday, and he'd left a note explaining he was meeting friends for an early hike. It wasn't a lie, exactly, but the omission of werewolves and mysterious buried objects made him feel slightly guilty. The morning air was crisp and laden with dew as he pedaled his bike toward Crawford Creek. Birds were already active, their morning songs creating a natural symphony that seemed more meaningful now that he knew something of Ruby's world. He found himself wondering what they were actually saying to each other. Warnings, greetings, territorial claims. Zoe was already waiting at the oak tree when he arrived, her own backpack looking considerably more organized than his. She had also brought a compass, a detailed topographic map of the area, and what appeared to be a small chemistry kit. "Just in case we need to analyze whatever we find," she explained when she caught Noah eyeing the unusual equipment. "Scientific method, remember? I'm pretty sure the sickness that walks isn't something you can test with litmus paper," Noah replied, but he smiled to soften the teasing. Ruby arrived moments later, the codex secured in her own backpack. She looked different somehow, more confident, more focused. The quiet, awkward new girl had been replaced by someone with purpose and authority beyond her years. "The wolves are waiting," she said by way of greeting. "They've been watching us since you arrived." Noah spun around, scanning the tree line. "Where? I don't see them." "They don't want to be seen yet," Ruby explained. "There's been human activity in the forest since dawn, hunters setting up blinds for deer season." "But deer season doesn't start for another month," Zoe pointed out. Ruby's expression darkened. "Some people don't care about seasons or rules. That's part of the imbalance." She led them away from the creek and deeper into the forest, following a game trail that grew progressively narrower and less distinct. Though Noah had lived in Whispering Pines his entire life and considered himself familiar with the local woods, after just 20 minutes of hiking, he found himself in terrain he'd never seen before. The trees here were older, massive trunks soaring skyward, creating a cathedral-like canopy that filtered the morning sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. Moss grew thick on rocks and fallen logs and the undergrowth had a lush, almost primeval quality. "Where are we?" he asked in a hushed voice, the atmosphere inspiring a natural reverence. "The old forest," Ruby replied. "Most people don't come here. The trails don't lead this way, and something in the human mind tends to turn away from these places, like a gentle suggestion to go elsewhere." "A suggestion from what?" Zoe asked, her scientific skepticism warring with the undeniable sense of otherness that permeated the ancient woods. "From the forest itself," Ruby said simply. "Places that have remained untouched for centuries develop their own kind of awareness, their own protections." As if summoned by her words, the wolves materialized from the underbrush ahead. The same 3 from the previous evening, led by Swiftover Stones, her amber eyes reflecting intelligence and purpose. "They'll guide us from here," Ruby said, nodding respectfully to the lead wolf. "But we need to move quickly. The thing they sense, it's growing stronger." The wolves set a brisk pace through the old forest, leading them on a winding route that sometimes followed visible trails, and sometimes seemed to cut through solid undergrowth that somehow parted before them. Noah quickly lost all sense of direction, relying entirely on their guides and Ruby's confident steps. After nearly an hour of steady hiking, Swiftover Stones halted abruptly at the crest of a small rise. The wolf's posture had changed, hackles slightly raised, ears forward, body tense with alertness or perhaps fear. Ruby stopped as well, placing a warning hand on Noah and Zoe's arms. "This is as far as they'll go," she whispered. "The wrongness is too strong ahead." "What wrongness?" Noah whispered back, seeing nothing unusual in the forest beyond. "It looks the same as everywhere else we've been." "Not to them." Ruby nodded toward the wolves, who were now pacing nervously. "And not to me. Can't you feel it? A heaviness in the air, a sourness." Noah concentrated, trying to sense whatever Ruby and the wolves were perceiving. At first there was nothing unusual, just the sounds and smells of the forest. Then, gradually, he became aware of a subtle wrongness, like the feeling before a migraine or the moment before a storm breaks. A pressure against his senses that wasn't physically painful, but somehow disturbing. "I think, maybe I feel something," he admitted. "Like everything is slightly out of tune." "Yes," Ruby looked at him with approval. "That's a good way to describe it." "I feel it too," Zoe said, surprising them both. "And look at the plants." She pointed to the vegetation ahead. At first glance it appeared normal, but upon closer inspection, Noah could see subtle differences. The leaves were a shade too dark, the arrangements of branches slightly irregular. Most telling of all, there were no birds in those trees, no insects buzzing around those plants, as if all living creatures instinctively avoided the area. Ruby knelt beside Swiftover Stones, communicating through small gestures and sounds. After a moment she stood, her expression grim. "The wolves will wait here for us. They say the thing we seek is in a depression about half a mile ahead, a place where the ground collapsed during the earthquake." She looked between her friends. "This is the dangerous part. If either of you wants to stay behind with the wolves, I understand." Noah and Zoe exchanged glances. "We're coming with you," Noah said firmly. "That's what friends do, remember?" Ruby nodded, a mixture of gratitude and concern on her face. "Stay close to me. Don't touch anything unusual. And if I tell you to run, don't argue, just run." With these less than reassuring instructions, she led them forward, leaving the wolves watching anxiously from the rise. The sense of wrongness intensified with every step. The forest grew quieter, the air heavier, until Noah felt like he was walking through invisible syrup. His head began to ache dully, and colors seemed slightly off. Greens too vivid, browns too red. The Codex mentions this feeling, Ruby said quietly as they made their way forward. It's a warning, a natural response to corruption. Corruption of what? Zoe asked, her scientific curiosity somehow intact despite their increasingly eerie surroundings. Of the natural order, Ruby replied. Something that doesn't belong here, something that twists the patterns of life into other patterns. Before Zoe could pursue this cryptic explanation, the ground ahead opened up into a roughly circular depression about 30 feet across. It was clearly recent. Broken trees lay scattered around its edges, their exposed roots pale and raw. The floor of the depression was bare earth, dark and oddly moist despite the dry weather they'd been having. The earthquake did this? Noah asked, staying well back from the edge. Ruby nodded, her eyes scanning the disturbed ground. It broke through a very old seal, something that had been buried deliberately long ago. By who? Zoe had taken out her notebook and was sketching the depression with scientific precision. By keepers, I think. Ruby carefully opened the codex, flipping through pages until she found what she was looking for. Look. The page showed an illustration of figures in ancient dress surrounding a hole in the ground. They appeared to be performing some kind of ritual, their hands raised toward a dark object being lowered into the earth. According to this, Ruby explained, there was a great sickness about 400 years ago, not a normal disease, but a corruption that turned living things against their nature. Plants that drank blood, animals that wouldn't die when killed, people who changed into something else. Noah felt goosebumps rising on his arms. Changed? How? Ruby shook her head. The codex doesn't say exactly, just that they were no longer of the natural world. She continued reading. The keepers of that time managed to gather the corruption into a physical vessel, some kind of stone or crystal, and buried it deep in the earth, sealing it with rituals and songs that would keep it dormant. Until the earthquake broke the seal, Zoe guessed, her pen hovering above her notebook. Yes. Ruby closed the book, her expression somber. And now it's waking up, calling to the animals first because they're more sensitive to its rhythms. Is that why the wolves came back? To warn people? Noah asked. To warn keepers, Ruby corrected. They recognized that there was no keeper presence in these mountains, so they came to re-establish the balance themselves. But they can't do what needs to be done. Only a keeper can renew the seal, and that would be you, Noah stated, suddenly understanding the weight Ruby carried. You have to, what, perform the ritual? Put the corruption back to sleep? Ruby nodded, a flicker of fear crossing her face before she mastered it. I've never done anything like this before. My mother would have known how, but... She trailed off, then squared her small shoulders. But the codex will guide me. It's why we have it. To preserve knowledge across generations. She approached the edge of the depression cautiously, the codex open in her hands. Noah and Zoe followed a few steps behind, the sense of wrongness now a palpable force pushing against them. There, Zoe whispered, pointing to the center of the depression. A small object protruded from the dark earth, something crystalline that caught the filtered sunlight and refracted it in unnatural ways. The colors it produced weren't part of any rainbow Noah had ever seen. They seemed to bend and twist in the air, creating patterns that hurt his eyes if he looked at them directly. Don't stare at it, Ruby warned, and whatever you do, don't touch it. She set the codex on a flat stone at the edge of the depression and began to remove items from her backpack. A small cloth bundle that proved to contain dried herbs, a bottle of clear water, and a leather pouch that clinked with what sounded like stones inside. What can we do to help? Noah asked, tearing his gaze away from the hypnotic crystal with effort. "I need to form a new seal," Ruby explained, unfolding a page in the codex that showed a circular pattern of symbols. A physical circle of protection, and then a circle of sound to activate it. "Zoe, can you help me place these stones? They need to form an exact pattern." From the leather pouch, she produced a collection of small, smooth stones, each a different mineral: quartz, obsidian, turquoise, and others Noah couldn't identify. "I'll need to measure precise distances," Zoe said, already pulling a tape measure from her seemingly bottomless backpack. "Just show me the pattern." As Zoe began the methodical work of placing the stones according to Ruby's directions, Noah felt increasingly useless. "What about me? What can I do?" Ruby looked up from where she was grinding herbs between two rocks. "You have the most important job," she said seriously. "You need to watch the crystal. If it changes, glows brighter, moves anything at all, you need to tell me immediately. But remember, don't stare directly at it for too long." Noah nodded, turning his attention to the disturbing object at the center of the depression. Now that he was focused on it, he could see that it wasn't simply reflecting light. It was pulsing with a rhythm that reminded him unsettlingly of a heartbeat. For the next half hour, he maintained his vigil while Ruby and Zoe worked with quiet efficiency around the edge of the depression. They created an intricate circle of stones, herbs, and what appeared to be tiny mirrors, all arranged in precise relationship to each other. "It's ready," Zoe announced finally, stepping back to survey their work. Ruby nodded, taking a deep breath. "Now comes the hard part. I need to activate it with sound." She removed her flute from her pocket, but hesitated before raising it to her lips. "This melody, it's different from anything I've played before. According to the Codex, it's not meant to communicate with nature, but to command it. That's not something keepers do lightly." The gravity in her voice made Noah shiver. "Is it dangerous?" "It can be," Ruby admitted, "especially for someone my age with limited experience. The power could, overwhelm me, change me." She looked at them both, her eyes reflecting her fear. "If something happens to me, if I start to look different or act strange, you need to take the Codex and run. Find my father, tell him what happened." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Noah said, with more confidence than he felt. "We're right here. We've got your back." Ruby smiled gratefully, then squared her shoulders and raised the flute. "Stay behind me, no matter what." The melody that emerged from the small instrument was unlike anything Noah had ever heard. It didn't sound like it should be possible from a simple wooden flute. Notes that seemed to overlap with themselves. Harmonies that created dissonance and resolution simultaneously. The sound vibrated in his chest, making his ears pop as if the air pressure was changing rapidly. The stones and herbs around the edge of the depression began to glow faintly, each with a different hue that somehow matched the tone Ruby was producing. The crystal at the center pulsed more rapidly, as if agitated by the music. "Noah," Zoe whispered urgently, clutching his arm. "Look at Ruby." He tore his gaze from the crystal to see that Ruby herself was beginning to glow with the same ethereal light he had witnessed on the mountain. It emanated from her skin, surrounding her in a cocoon of radiance that seemed to intensify with each phrase of the melody. But something was wrong. The light wasn't pure and white as it had been before. Veins of darkness were threading through it, spreading like cracks in glass. And Ruby's face was contorted with effort, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool morning air. "She's struggling," Zoe whispered. "The crystal, it's fighting back." Indeed, the alien object was now fully uncovered, the soil around it having receded as if repelled. It was larger than it had first appeared, about the size of a softball, and it pulsed with increasingly frantic energy. Waves of that wrong-colored light pushed against Ruby's glow, creating a visual battle in the air between them. "We have to help her," Noah decided, stepping forward before Zoe could stop him. "How?" Zoe hissed. "We don't have keeper abilities." Noah had no answer, but he couldn't stand by and watch Ruby fight this battle alone. On instinct, he moved to stand beside her, placing his hand gently on her shoulder in a gesture of support. Zoe hesitated only a moment before joining them, completing a triangle with Ruby at its apex. The moment they connected, something extraordinary happened. The light surrounding Ruby intensified dramatically, but the dark veins receded. The melody from her flute gained strength and clarity, the notes ringing through the forest with new authority. Ruby's eyes widened in surprise, but she didn't falter in her playing. Instead, she leaned into the strength they were somehow providing, her fingers moving more confidently over the flute's surface. The circle of stones now glowed so brightly it was painful to look at directly. The ground within it began to shift and flow like liquid, creating a vortex centered on the crystal. Slowly, inexorably, the corrupted object began to sink back into the earth, its pulsing light growing more frantic as if in protest. "It's working," Zoe whispered excitedly. But their celebration was premature. Just as the crystal was about to disappear completely beneath the surface, it emitted a pulse of energy so powerful it knocked all three children backward. Noah landed hard, the breath knocked from his lungs, his vision swimming with afterimages of that terrible light. When he managed to sit up, gasping for air, he saw the crystal hovering above the depression, no longer sinking but rising, vibrating with malevolent purpose. Ruby had lost her flute in the blast. She scrambled to her feet, her face pale but determined. "The seal almost worked," she panted. "But it's too strong for just the flute. I need... Her eyes fell on the codex, which had been blown open to a page Noah couldn't see from his position. Whatever she read, there made her expression shift from desperation to resolve. "I know what to do," she said, her voice suddenly calm. "But I need your help, both of you." "Anything," Noah said immediately, helping Zoe to her feet. "Just tell us what to do." "The codex says that when keeper music isn't enough, keeper blood can complete the seal." Ruby pulled a small pocket knife from her backpack. "Not much, just a drop from each of us, freely given." Noah and Zoe exchanged alarmed glances. "Blood magic?" Zoe questioned, sounding skeptical despite the impossible scene before them. "That sounds dangerous." "Not magic," Ruby corrected. "Intention made physical. Our willingness to sacrifice something of ourselves to restore balance." She looked between them, her eyes serious. "I won't lie to you. This will create a bond between us, a responsibility. Once we do this, we're connected to this place, to this seal, for life." The crystal pulsed more violently, its alien light growing stronger. The wrongness Noah had sensed earlier now saturated the air, making it difficult to breathe, to think clearly. "I'm in," he said, extending his hand. "Whatever it takes." Zoe hesitated only a moment longer before nodding. "Me too. We're already in this together." Ruby's relief was palpable. Quickly but carefully, she pricked first her own finger, then Noah's, then Zoe's. 3 drops of blood fell onto the open pages of the codex, where they merged and began to glow with a light that was somehow both like and unlike the crystal's emanations. "Now we need to sing," Ruby instructed. "Not the keeper melody, just a simple tone, but we need to sing it together, in perfect harmony." "I don't sing," Noah protested weakly. "You don't need to be good," Ruby assured him. "You just need to mean it. Listen to me first, then join in." She took a deep breath and produced a clear, pure note. Not quite a hum, not quite a word, but something in between. After a moment, Zoe matched the pitch perfectly, her scientific precision proving useful in an unexpected way. Noah closed his eyes, focusing on the tone they were creating. When he felt ready, he added his own voice, slightly deeper than the girls, but blending with surprising ease. The three-part harmony vibrated in the air around them, interacting with the glowing blood on the codex's pages. The light spread, flowing down Ruby's arms, across their joined hands, and into their voices, until it felt to Noah like they were singing with light rather than sound. The crystal's violent pulsing faltered, then stabilized into a rhythm that matched their song. Slowly, almost reluctantly, it began to descend once more into the earth. The circle of stones and herbs Ruby and Zoe had created glowed in synchronicity with their voices, forming a barrier through which the corruption could not escape. As the crystal disappeared beneath the soil, the earth flowed over it, sealing it from sight. The ground solidified, hardening into a surface marked with a perfect replica of the symbol pattern from the codex's pages. Their voices gradually faded, leaving behind a profound silence. The three friends stood motionless, still holding hands, as the glow around them slowly dissipated. The sense of wrongness that had permeated the air was gone, replaced by a feeling of rightness so intense it brought tears to Noah's eyes. "We did it," Ruby whispered, awe and disbelief mingling in her voice. "We renewed the seal. Is it permanent?" Zoe asked, ever practical, despite the wonder of what they had just accomplished. Ruby gently released their hands and knelt to examine the symbol pattern now etched into the earth. "Nothing is permanent," she said softly, "but this will hold for many years, perhaps decades. And now that I know how, I can renew it again when necessary." She looked up at them, her eyes bright with emotion. "We can renew it." "We," Noah repeated, the word carrying new weight and meaning. The bond Ruby had mentioned wasn't just metaphorical. He could feel it. A subtle connection linking the three of them and anchoring them to this place. "What happens now?" Zoe asked, beginning to collect the stones and herbs that had formed their circle. "Now we go home," Ruby said simply. "We live our lives, go to school, do our homework, but we also watch and listen. We maintain the balance in small ways, every day." She smiled, a genuine, carefree expression that made her look like the 10-year-old she actually was. "And sometimes we have adventures." The wolves were waiting for them at the rise, their postures now relaxed, their eyes regarding the three children with what Noah could only interpret as respect. Swiftover Stones approached Ruby directly, touching her nose briefly to the girl's outstretched hand in a gesture of acknowledgement. "They'll spread the word," Ruby explained as they began the journey back through the old forest. "Tell the other animals that the corruption is contained, that balance has been restored." She glanced at Noah and Zoe with a smile. "And that Whispering Pines has keepers again, 3 of them. But we're not keepers," Noah protested. "Not like you." "Maybe not exactly like me," Ruby agreed. "But you both felt the wrongness. You both contributed to the sealing. And now you're both connected to this place in a way most people will never understand." She shrugged. "Sounds like keepers to me, even if you don't have all the traditional abilities." As they hiked back toward familiar trails, Noah found himself noticing things he had never perceived before. Patterns in the way sunlight filtered through leaves, subtle changes in the behavior of birds as they passed, the almost musical rhythm of their own footsteps on the forest floor. The world seemed more alive, more connected than it had just hours ago. "Ruby," he said suddenly, a thought occurring to him, You said your mother was a keeper, but she died trying to prevent a forest fire. Couldn't she have used the embrace, like you did on the mountain? Ruby's face grew solemn. The embrace doesn't always come, she explained quietly. It requires absolute selflessness. No thought for your own survival, only for what you're trying to protect. She looked down at her hands. My mother knew exactly what she was risking. She chose to try anyway. Like you did with the bears, Zoe observed. You weren't thinking about yourself at all. Ruby nodded. It's the paradox of being a keeper. To access the greatest power, you have to be willing to give up everything, including your own life. She looked between her new friends, her expression serious. That's why the responsibility is so heavy, why many keepers eventually break under its weight. But you won't, Noah said with certainty, because you're not alone anymore. Ruby's smile returned, brighter than before. No, I'm not, and that changes everything. As they emerged from the forest into the familiar field behind Ruby's house, the morning's adventure already felt somewhat dreamlike. The ordinary world of houses and cars and Saturday chores resumed around them, oblivious to the battle they had fought or the bond they had formed. Same time next weekend? Zoe suggested, her scientific curiosity clearly still burning bright. I have about 1,000 questions about the Codex and Keeper abilities. And I want to learn more about talking to animals, Noah added, even if it's just basic stuff. Ruby looked between them, happiness radiating from her in almost tangible waves. Next weekend, she agreed, and many weekends after that. As they parted ways, heading to their respective homes and the normal activities of childhood, Noah felt the subtle tug of their new connection. Not a restriction, but a reminder. A promise that no matter where life took them, they would always share this secret knowledge, this responsibility, this friendship forged in wonder and mutual trust. Whispering Pines had its keepers once more, and though the challenges ahead might be daunting, the balance had 3 guardians now instead of 1. 3 hearts committed to preserving the ancient harmony between humanity and the natural world. It had begun with 2 bears on a crumbling cliff. Where it would lead, none of them could say, but they would face it together, step by step, adventure by adventure, learning and growing and protecting what mattered most. And for now, that was more than enough.